You're listening to The Other 50%, a History of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. This is the podcast where we talk to successful women in entertainment and hear their stories. In this episode, I got to speak with Kate Hearst. Kate is a film historian who holds a Ph.D. in history and an M.F.A. in film, both from Columbia University. She currently teaches film history at several colleges, including Sarah Lawrence. One of her courses is called Women, Gender, Race, Class, and Sexuality in Film and Media, History and Film Theory. How do you like them apples? You can find us at theother50%.com to see bios, photos, the blog, the merchandise. You can find us on iTunes, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the places, and we are now on Stitcher. If you like this podcast, please tell a friend. And I have another podcast called The Other 50%, a History of Tech. You can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, or on the Other 50% website. That's where I talk to successful women in tech and hear their stories. Okay, here's Kate. Okay, usually how I start is we talk about you. And what is your job?
I'm an historian by training, and I went to film school, and I have been teaching film history. I first got a job teaching in the graduate women's history program at Sarah Lawrence College about 6-7 years ago, and they wanted me to teach something with film, and then they left it very open, and then I spent an entire summer kind of researching and putting together a really what turned out to be a fabulous class, very, very popular, called Gender, Race, and Sexuality in Film, History and Theory. And basically what I set out was to teach a course that was primarily films directed by women, from literally the silent era to the present. And we started with Alice Guy Blaché, who I don't know if you know, was in 1890s making films alongside her male partners at the Gaumont Company in France. It's a wonderful story where she was working as a secretary, and they were trying to market their camera equipment, which made, motion pictures. And they said, sure. And then she started making what are known for that period called actualities, which are short films and short vignettes. And then she started writing little stories. And then she suddenly started having all these things, out there that she had done along with Thomas Edison and all these innovators of the motion picture. But her history was pretty much forgotten. Even the Gaumonts, who wrote their own history, left her out. And it was only years later, literally in the 50s, where she was writing a memoir about that she had this career doing those. Oh, and by the way, she moves to America. She marries here. She continues to make movies, like feature-length films here. She even, she did a thing that's still available called Ocean Wave. Problem with this early period of cinema history is that a lot of those films are lost.
Yeah, I'm wondering, how do you even research the women who were doing it if they've been left out of the history of it?
Right. Well, you go back to the paper. You go back to a lot of these early women cinema filmmakers. You a guy named Anthony Slide, and then later film historians. There's like a cohort of really important women filmmakers, film historians, Jane Gaines, Yvonne Tasker, Shelley Stamp, who go back in the archives. What they found was that there was advertisements for the films that these early cinema women were making. Lois Weber, you have an ad for her film on the next to D.W. Griffith. And so they went back, and then they thought, well, gee, if it's in the paperwork, let's go see if it's in the archives. And they went back and they started to find this cachet of films that are made by women. And Jane Gaines started a thing called Women Film Pioneers Project, which I encourage you and everyone to look up. It's a website that is ongoing where literally women internationally all over the world were making films, and their stories have been forgotten. And this, this website is kind of like a Wikipedia for women film pioneers and women in the silent period. And they're finding out that women literally in, Japan, in Europe, in, all over the world were, had been making movies. And so so this website's ongoing, and, you can access it. But so I found this history fascinating because I, as an historian, wasn't that aware of it. And actually, Jane Gaines is, a colleague. She helped me put together my class. And what I found so inspiring was that when I was teaching this to students, and, we can go back and also think about, the kinds of women that were, that were involved doing this. I mean, my class ran, it was from a whole year class. So it ran from the earliest films, to the contemporary scene. But, we did, starting in the sound period, you have Dorothy Arzner, and actually I made a little bit of a list here somewhere. Yeah, I mean, even, early film people like Mary Pickford were involved directing films as well. But yeah, so in the contemporary period, you have like Maya Deren, who does experimental film. Then you have Agnes Varda and Chantal Ackerman. You have a woman named Lizzie Borden. And then Barbara Kopple, Julie Dash, Mira Nair. We studied Jenny Livingston, who did a wonderful film called Paris is Burning. Jane Campion, Marlene Goris. Kimberly Pierce, I went to film school with. Courtney Hunt, I went to film school with. Catherine Bigelow. Julie Taymor. I mean, the list is infinite. What I found is that my students who had been taking film classes from predominantly male professors knew none of this history, knew none of it, zero.
It's just skipped over.
It's just not included in the canon. Instead, you're still studying the Scorsese, you're still studying, Hitchcock. In the early period, God forbid they could possibly talk about silent cinema without talking about D.W. Griffith. And, and yes, they get, they're second string to the canon. The irony is this canon was only written in the 70s. I mean, film as a study, cinema studies only evolved in the 70s, and when a lot of this research was being done. So it's pretty shocking. I just came literally a month ago from a conference, the Society for Cinema and Media Studies. It's their big national conference, and literally, the three women who were doing a lot of this early research, Shelley Stamp, Yvonne Tasker, and Jane Gaines. They were saying, they were actually bemoaning their own fate, that after 40 years of research and rediscovering this rich history, they're still not included in the textbooks. There might be a box in the side of the page saying, oh yes, Dorothy Arzner was making movies during this time. And it's crazy.
It is crazy. Were the films inferior? Is that why they're excluded?
No, I don't think that they're inferior. I think that they're demarcations, though. I think that D.W. Griffith happened to make a long film, and, it had sort of certain earmarks. But there were women making movies at that time that had very similar creative input. And, I tell you, the difference could be that a lot of the, these big male directors had more films than a lot of the women filmmakers. So in other words, Scorsese makes many more films than, I'm studying right now, Barbara Kopple. And what's interesting to me is, do you know who Barbara Kopple is?
No.
Barbara Kopple's a documentary filmmaker. She's won 2 Oscars. She made a film in 1976 called Harlan County, USA. It was about a labor strike at that time. And it's a wonderful film. And, this is where I'm digging deep in this research, so that's why I'm switching gears here and talking a little bit about documentary. But literally, there are articles, there are textbooks about how in the 60s you had these filmmakers, David and Albert Maysles, who made these direct cinema documentaries. And it involved cinema verite, letting the camera roll, letting people just, let life emerge in front of the camera. And then you switch to, I'm sure you know who Michael Moore is.
Of course.
Right. But you know what? Before Michael Moore, there was Barbara Kopple. And not only that, she won an Oscar in 1976 for doing a film that's, as interesting, as technically, different, moving out of this direct cinema moment into shaping a documentary very much along the lines of Hollywood narrative fiction films and participating in the film and, all the same earmarks that a Michael Moore does a decade later. And yet her story has been forgotten. And not only that, she's now won 2 Oscars for her documentary work for Harlan County, USA and American Dream. She's continued to make movies, Wild Man Blues about Woody Allen, Shut Up and Sing about the Dixie Chicks and their issues with speaking out against Bush. Recently she did This Is Everything Gigi Gorgeous, which is it's a YouTube Red documentary that was also shown at Sundance. She's made close to 40 films, and no one's written a book about her. So here you have a woman who even has this wide range of films and is still not being written about by men.
Still invisible. It reminds me of like Hidden Figures. When that story came out, everyone started asking where there must be more stories like this of women doing the work and just not being included. And here you're telling me all about it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what's going on. The difference is, well, there is no difference in the sense that thank goodness for that film. And again, like that film should have gotten much more play. I thought it was brilliantly put together and it was an amazing story about, 3 figures that we didn't know existed. Mm-hmm. But what's happening today, because now we have women that you can't say they're hidden to the point of they're not, they don't exist. Catherine Bigelow, Sophia Coppola, Nora Ephron, Julie Taymor, Deborah Granick. There's a huge...
Penny Marshall
is not even mentioned in film studies. And then I don't know why.
Directed huge films that made tons of money.
Yes. My students didn't even know. I mean, they'd never actually even seen Thelma and Louise. Now, that wasn't even directed by a woman.
What?
A lot of these films are, I don't know exactly why this is happening. I mean, what happened at the Cinema Studies conference that I went to, this was presented as a problem, and that, basically women have to start rewriting the textbooks. But this marginalization continues just in the teaching of film. So
then young women going into it think that they're going to have to be a pioneer because there are no women before them, when it's not true.
It's not true, and all I can suggest is that, women should empower themselves by taking classes about, whatever's an offering at their university or institution. Start empowering themselves and studying other women who make movies, because I found that my students, coming also out of Sarah Lawrence College, they really gained a certain level of confidence in their own work, knowing that they were part of this long tradition instead of just feeling a pioneer in the field. But it's an ongoing marginalization.
It's craziness. So then what do you tell the women when half of the class, I'm sure, is women, and then you tell them what the data is in the actual business? Do you have any insight on what happens? Because we know in film school it's 50-50. First job, 97% goes to men. What happens there, if you know?
I heard a lot about that issue. I think that the Old Boys Network continues. I think that women, a couple of things happen. I mean, in terms of my own story, you know what? I started working in the industry. I got a job doing development for the Paloma. First, I actually worked for Barbara Kopple briefly as an intern. And then I got a job in the industry doing development work. And then I got married and had kids, and I left for a number of years and then came back, frankly, to get my doctorate and start teaching. Although I was working on a screenplay And I continued to work on screenplays, but I was working on a screenplay, and some of the reason why I even went back into teaching is I was taking a class with someone, a young guy, who literally had done the Columbia University Film School program that I had done. And I thought to myself, why am I taking this class at all? I mean, I did that. I know that. And that's actually started going back into teaching and having enough confidence to go back into teaching at all, let alone filmmaking. I think women have to understand that it takes longer than they think to get movies made, even for men. I had this conversation with another colleague about, even you look at somebody who's graduated from film school who then becomes a fairly substantial filmmaker. Kimberly Pierce. She didn't just graduate and make Boys Don't Cry and that's it. It took her a good 10 years out of film school. So I guess my advice is to give yourself the time, if you need to have a day job and you still persist in your creative work, because it takes more time than you might imagine, and create a support system for yourself. I think that a lot of women then find themselves in kind of dead-end jobs, and they need to break out of those and also find friends or groups of people that, support their creativity.
Yeah, it seems to be important to stay involved in the business, in projects. Don't go work at Starbucks while you're waiting to become a director. Go work on a set while you're waiting to become a director.
Yes. But, there's so many changes going on right now that I actually think that, my experience and the experience of my generation was just very different than today. I mean, you do have these multiple platforms. You do have streaming and internet. And there's another platform that I hope that young people think about, and that is the museum world. There are a lot of, women who are artists that have certain successes, and the art world tends to have openings for a lot of films are now being shown in museums, and a lot of art installations are involved with, moving images. And that's
interesting.
Something to, to think about, going forward.
Yeah. Now, I know you were also involved in a study where they were talking to women who had just recently graduated and had started their careers and had given a bunch of feedback. And then I believe you were kind of making sense of that feedback. Can you talk a little bit about what those women's experiences were?
Yes. Well, it sounded very similar to my experiences of film school, which of course seems horrifying that not much has changed in, 20 years or since the 1990s. They felt that, while they might have found a mentor to work with, that a lot of the male students had, louder voices often in the work, and that there were you had sort of the beginning of, the young boy network going on in the film school itself. But they did feel supported to some degree. I mean, they are 50% of the class, and they do win many of the awards. It really is that first job out of film school, and it's not a meritocracy. I mean, it really does seem that the men, for whatever reason, a lot of them, either have contacts already in the industry or somehow end up getting, the more creative jobs. So it's tough. It's really tough.
It's kind of a mystery, but I'm encouraged that everybody's noticing now and talking about it.
Yes, and that's thanks to, among other people, Stacy Smith. Brutal about just hammering that fact that, after all these years, and it's really practically since, the post-war period, that the needle has not changed much in terms of women directing movies. I should think that with the internet and with streaming and the need for so much content, that women today might be able to navigate this landscape differently and, continue. Their mothers are going to be very upset with them because they're probably not going to necessarily make any money at it right away, which is always what my mother used to always ask. Am I getting paid for that? And, 9 times out of 10, I'd have to say, no, I'm not getting paid for it.
Yeah, that is the trick. I'm meeting a lot of young women who are just creating their own content and putting it up on the internet and making things happen and doing really good work. The trick will then be, are they going to be seen as people who can do free work that goes on the internet, or will they be plucked out and given some real money to make a real film? That seems like the leap that is so hard to make.
But you see it happening to, Key and Peele is one of the, examples of that. Again, men of color, but men. There is a lot of, looking through the internet and, on YouTube for new talent. Mm-hmm. So again, I think the advice that I wish somebody had pointed out to me was that it was going to take 10 years. Like, give yourself a wider frame than say, okay, in 1 year, if I don't get the job, that's it. I'm done with filmmaking. That, you really say, okay, in the next 10 years, and maybe there's some other things I will be doing at the same time. But, even when I was in development for the Pallone Company, which was a primarily television company under Judy Pallone. I had some friends. We'd get together, once a month and share our screenplay ideas and even share our screenplays. So there was a lot of doing work, on the weekends and in our free time to continue doing the creative work.
How do you think we get women back in the canon?
Well, I'm trying to do that right now by just writing books, going to other women's movies. I'm writing reviews. I purposely try to choose films that I'm writing reviews of, women's films. I think that's part of it. I mean, women's work is as complex, as interesting, as narratively strong. The visuals are as strong, and it doesn't make sense. It's somewhat, it just doesn't make sense that they're excluded.
Yeah, it boggles the mind a little bit because, of course, they're as interesting and complex, and of course they are, but we are preaching to the choir.
Yes. Well, I love Donnella's doing the survey that she did, where women are starting to talk about it. Not only Stacy Smith printing the statistics, but, this New York Film School interview and roundtable, really highlighting and asking those questions. Because, again, that's the sort of thing that young women can start to understand what's going on and maybe, collectively get together to fight that.
And that's part of why I do this podcast, honestly, because I saw all the data and I wanted to know what are the stories behind the data? Like, what is the actual experience? What's happening for people? I think it's so interesting and so important to hear the reality of what people are trying to do and what they're up against.
Well, I think there's one other approach to this, and that is also to include the men.
For sure.
Approach men who have new streaming sites or who even have old streaming sites and, address these issues and find out, include them, ask them why don't they have women included in their roster for films for next year,
and I bet half of them would say, oh, it hadn't occurred to me. Let me put them in. That's why we call it unconscious gender bias. And it's funny because if they really are doing it on purpose to have to actually make the argument as to why they should only be looking at white men's films, that'd be entertaining. I mean, I think it's probably very few and far between where they would really argue for doing it how they're doing it.
Yeah.
Let's hope.
Exactly. Well, what have you discovered in your interviews with women, successful women in Hollywood? What do they say? I mean, they should be on the front lines for promoting women.
And they are. It's interesting. There are a lot of common themes. A big one I come across is the imposter syndrome. Even women who are top executives at studios aren't sure that they've accomplished anything. something I'm thinking about a lot now is everyone has experienced sexual harassment along the way and has figured out how to just brush it off and move on. Like, there's no time for dealing with it. It's just something you deal with and you get on with life. So the women who have done really well are incredible, and they are forces of nature, and they've just done it. And their advice to everybody is to just go for it, be fearless, ask for what you want, get in there. And it's still hard.
Well, I guess, my advice is just don't lose the faith, and also do your best work. I mean, continue to learn. Filmmaking is also a process of, there's a learning curve to it that, again, women in film school tend to think, oh, well, now I've learned how to make a film, and,
done.
Right. It's not done. It's ongoing. I am still writing screenplays, and I'm still learning new things about how it can become, better and better. And I think it's really good. There's some other younger women I know that, use the internet, post things on YouTube, and they just keep pursuing their art anyway.
Yeah. It's really important to just do the work.
Yeah.
Not wait around, not do the typical female conditioned things, which is wait around and ask for permission, wait to be discovered, wait to be invited. You really just have to do the work and get in there and just do it.
And I actually am thinking about what I mentioned earlier about art installations. You think about Maria Abramovich, or you think about a Cindy Sherman, or even a Kara Walker. It's like these are all artists who just continue to pursue their art, even if, their work wasn't necessarily recognized in the day. And then it sort of morphs into things. I mean, Nan Goldin as a photographer, she was just taking pictures of the community that she lived in and published The Ballad of Sexual Dependency. And, now her career is taken off in amazing ways. So again, it's like a little bit of the self-confidence and patience that it can happen, it will happen.
So would you advise women who are in film school programs to be more vocal about demanding to have a more diverse canon when they're studying it?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Before talking to you, this hadn't even occurred to me. Like, I wonder how many people it doesn't even occur to.
That women are learning about men's films and not women's films?
Yeah.
It's huge. It's really huge.
And that there are women's films from back in the day that we should be talking about.
Yes. And even of today that we should be talking about that get marginalized.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, Penny Marshall. I mean, Penny Marshall's completely off the radar, and I don't know why. Those films are, they're remarkable. They're, they can fit into, whatever an academic is teaching at the time, and I think about even Nora Ephron, who not that long ago passed away. And one of the classes I recently taught was on film genre. And I specifically included romantic comedy. A lot of something like that is not necessarily taught even for things like film genre. So,
It's just dismissed as an entire genre?
It's just,
Chick flicks?
Well, there you go. Chick flicks. It's put down, even though it's, a lot of fun and people really enjoy those films ultimately.
And chicks are half the population.
Exactly. No, I was thinking, it's like film noir. How many books are on film noir? And really, how many women filmmakers make film noirs? Well, not that many, but there are, Jane Campion did a film noir, But because it's like, well, here's the classic film noir, and then, of course, we have to teach this film noir, it ends up going down this rabbit hole of just being, white men making film noirs, which is it's almost, kind of laughable. I mean, the Wachowski sisters, well, they're now sisters, but made Bound, which is a very clever, interesting twist on the film noir, about two women getting involved and knocking off the mob boss. And, it's like thinking creatively and a little bit outside the box for literally film scholars as well.
Yeah, we've been so conditioned to think of male-made and films about men as being universal for everyone. and films about or made by women are for women.
Yes.
I wonder if the new generation that has been brought up on Disney princesses will look at things differently. Because all the little boys have been brought up on Disney princesses, and they watch those movies.
Well, Disney's a very interesting case, and I think, young adults should be taught much more in film schools than it's taught. And Disney, you're using the word princesses. There are a lot of really empowered female characters in Disney films that...
Yeah, and boys are expected to watch and like those movies. But then something happens when we're all adults where stories about women are no longer interesting.
Yeah. No, it's very true. It's very true. Yeah, Disney's an interesting case. Well, and look, I don't want to knock. There are some male directors that make, wonderful representations of women. I think about Ang Lee. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is actually one of the films that I was teaching in that class as well, because it's got such interesting representation and such interesting, women characters. These multiple platforms make it a whole new world and conceivably a game changer. And possibly women should think about getting involved in not only making these films, but maybe owning a streaming site, maybe figuring out ways to market one of these sites for women's films, or
figuring out the business side of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, women's films do make money. It's just a myth that they don't, that people keep repeating.
Yes. No, absolutely. And that's one of the big myths. And I think that now that Hollywood has kind of created a strange environment for themselves, that they are going to have to start addressing that women do go to the movie theaters, and go to movie theaters. I think the statistics are that they go more frequently than men do.
Yeah.
So, that's something, again, we've got to start talking more about in order to conceivably get through to have stories made by women more prominently out there.
Amen, sister. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you wanted to be sure to say?
I love Stacey Smith really getting in, every newspaper every year and coming back and saying, still 2%.
Yeah, the data is hard to argue with.
Yeah.
Tell me this: are you a success?
Am I a success?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I'm a success. I think I'm on my way to being more of a success. I think it's time for me to write these books that I want to write, and I'm taking time off now to do that.
Yes, please. Write those books. Are you a badass?
Am I a badass? Maybe not enough of a badass. I think inspire a lot of my students, but I try to take a back seat and let them be badasses.
You're a badass coach.
I'm a badass coach, yeah.
Okay, is there anything you haven't accomplished that you want to accomplish?
Well, I'd like to see the numbers changing. I'd like to see more films directed by women. I'm not sure how to do that, but I'm doing the best that I can to contribute to changing that tide.
You are definitely doing your part.
Thank you. Trying more of it in that, yeah.
What advice would you give your 20-year-old self, knowing what you know now?
I think to have persisted along the creative path of filmmaking, instead of shortchanging that and feeling that, just feeling that, wow, since I didn't do it in, a couple years, that career's finished. I really think that when you see, literally the list of women that do succeed in making films, and the spectrum, Julie Taymor being as creative as she is in different ways before she even got to filmmaking, as a puppeteer, doing a lot of other things. But even Catherine Bigelow, give yourself the permission to continue pursuing artistic work.
It's a long game.
It's a long game, but it has payoffs. Catherine Bigelow's actually in art school, and you also find that a lot of filmmakers start in other businesses. Nora Ephron was a journalist. When you start taking apart the stories of successful women, it's not just, oh, they went to film school and then they started, a year later making the fabulous me.
No one has that story.
No one has that story,
Not a linear path. Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thank you.
You've been listening to The Other 50%, A History of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. I'd like to thank Kate Hearst for telling us her story. And special thanks to Jonathan Lucas for editing, Jay Rowe, Danny Rosner, and Allison McQuaid for the music. Please find us on iTunes and Stitcher and subscribe and leave a review. And of course on our website, theother50%.com, all spelled out in letters, for added features, bios of our guests, pictures, merchandise, and also the blog. You can also follow us on Facebook, on Twitter at Other50%, and Instagram at Other50% Podcast. And don't forget to check out The Other 50%, A History of Tech. Thanks for listening. See you next time.